So let's talk about why it's so hard to visualize pattern making. It's basically 2D pieces that are supposed to shape a 3D body. And of course that's hard to visualize at first. You're not trained to think like that. Even in school or art classes, even there most of the things are 2D. That's why you're not thinking in 3D. And of course it's hard if you never trained your brain to think like that. Your brain needs to learn how to shape volume, and that disconnect between flat patterns and finer garments is what makes it magical but also kind of frustrating. But here are good news: it's a skill and not a talent. You can actually learn it. The more you practice it, the better your brain gets into this 3D thinking, and you will learn how a dart changes volumes and how seams shape curves, and in general how small changes shape the whole look. I will give you a few tips that will help you to get better at pattern making. First, you need to learn how to take measurements and how to transfer it onto paper. And you create that by creating base blocks. Base blocks are like the industry standard, and from that base blocks, most of the sewing patterns out there are created. And you need to learn how to make a proper one. Then next step is to learn how to manipulate darts, how to rotate them, and in general how to use them to create shape. And I think that's the most important part. And after you learned how to remove, move and manipulate darts, you can start with your first pattern creations. Start with small changes like moving the dart and creating dividing seams in an interesting way. And if you figured that out and you created some samples and mock-ups and everything looks good, you can then go ahead and start to analyze clothing pieces. Sometimes it helps to just rip apart some old clothing pieces so you can see how it's built. But actually, if you see a clothing piece, it's more about figuring out proportions. Where's the waist? Where's the hip line? You always know there was a dart, and how did they get to a dividing seam? Was the dart moved towards the center front and then a dividing seam was created? After you analyzed a few garments, you can then start with recreating them in order to get better in estimating proportions and stuff. So it's something that you need to train, but it's possible. If you want more tips and more details about something, just let me know. And yeah, just keep learning.